Okay, welcome everyone, and thanks for joining the Manchester Java community today. First off, I'd like to say thanks to our sponsor, RecWorks, who cover the meetup fees for the Manchester Java community. We really appreciate this, so thanks to them for providing this sponsorship. So today, we welcome back Andreas Almiray, a Java and Groovy developer and a Java champion who works at Oracle. Andreas will be giving a talk on JReleaser today. Thanks for joining us, Andreas. If anyone has any questions during today's talk, please pop them into the chat area and we'll get them asked at the relevant points. Okay, without further ado, I'll hand over to Andreas for his talk on JReleaser.
Well, thank you very much, Jonathan. And I'm really happy to be back with the Manchester Java community once again. And okay, maybe I should share my screen. That'll make things easier. And play the slides. So today I would like to talk about a tool that I've been developing for almost a year now. And like many of you, we eventually have to post releases or create binaries and make sure that the jars and the zip files and everything else, a platform installer, is available to your consumers, to your end users. And depending on how many things you do, you probably have to jump through many hoops to make this work. Or for some other projects, it's a little bit easier, but it's always something that is missing. And we think about, oh, we should fix this for the next time we do a release. And we add a note to it, and then we forget. And the next release is like, this thing again, some stuff like that. There's always something that happens. So because I work with so many open source projects, I have to do a lot of releases, and trying to automate and reuse and refactor these releases was always a pain. And so that's the reason why this tool exists, called JReleaser. So I'm Andreas Almiray. My current employer is Oracle. I work at a database group, and we do a lot of things with open source. Yeah, you heard that right, Oracle and open source, they do mix. If you're interested to know more about those things, please talk to me. I'm really, really keen into doing that. So the reason why to do JReleaser. So personally, one of the projects that I handle is called Iconlink. Iconlink is a set of, it's a library, but it's a set of icons that you can use in UI or desktop applications, be it Swing or JavaFX. So writing a JavaFX or a Swing application is really a straightforward task. It's not that difficult. And at the end of the day, what you want is, once you build the application, you want to ship it to the user so that the user can consume it. Now, it's kind of like a straightforward task. You get the jar, you get the binary, you get something, a zip file, and simply say, hey, user, here it is, right? Well, not really, because you need to find a way to package this thing so that the users can consume it much easily. Is your user someone that fancies using OS X? Likely, then that user will prefer installing applications using Homebrew. But what if it happens to be Windows? Well, maybe it's Winget, or maybe it's a Scoop, which is similar to Homebrew. Or maybe that user prefers Linux or any Linux or Unix-like environment. So maybe it's a Snapcraft or Flatpak or something else, right? So what do I need to do as a Java developer, someone that's producing just a simple binary, to be consumable through all these different platform-specific packages? Also, once I have made a release, what kind of documentation do I attach to it? Do I make a changelog? Do I make release notes? How can I automate the generation of such release notes? So how can I get a lot of metadata coming from the project to be fed into their release notes, the documentation, and what else, right? So these things start just to explode very rapidly. And originally we thought, here's the jar, just go for it. But it's not really that the case, right? So what I was thinking of how to build this thing, how to produce my icons and this JavaFX application, I looked into two other projects. Now, one of them is called GoReleaser. This is for the Go language, because last year I also started to write Go code, and I built a command line tool that I wanted to publish. And as you know, Go code creates platform-specific binaries. So how will I make sure that I can, instead of just supplying the source code, that I supply ready-made binaries, but also through the different distribution channels that the user would like to use. Again, Homebrew, Scoop, Snapcraft, all those. GoReleaser takes care of that, plus many other things. So when I saw that tool, I said, wow, I want that for Java, but it does not exist at that time. In parallel, I also looked at JBank, which if you haven't seen before, is another way that you can launch Java source code or jars. Very much is the Java CLI that you really want to use all the time. JBank found itself in the same, facing the same issues, which is once I have built the zip file, the binary for this version, how do I distribute this for all the different consumers and all these different distribution channels? Well, the author, Max Anderson, did it using Gradle. Well, the whole build for JBank uses Gradle, and he used a bunch of scripts and a lot of stuff in order to do that. So now I have two projects, one that automates everything, but just for Go, and another that automates everything, but it's specific to JBank. So what if I could take both of them and build a Java version of it? And that's exactly how JReleaser came to be, hence the name, so JReleaser. So Max and I started a discussion on how JBank does things, and we look into the lessons learned from JBank. We're building its own release pipeline, and we put those lessons learned into the tool, into JReleaser, and we kept going. So what it is, basically, JReleaser is a template engine. You supply the given inputs, which are the binaries that you create with your build tool of choice, whether it's Ant, yes, still alive, or Maven or Gradle or something else, plus a model or a metadata that defines what you want to do with those binaries. Those things you feed it to JReleaser, and JReleaser can give you the option to create Git releases to popular Git services such as GitHub, GitLab, GitHub, others. You can package for platform-specific packagers such as JBank also, Homebrew, Snapcraft, Scoop, and others. And finally, if you want to, you can announce their release to different communication channels. Twitter is very popular, but if you want to publish to SDK man, well, also you can do that. So how does it do it? Well, based on GoReleaser, GoReleaser is a tool that takes one single file, a configuration file called YAML format, and goes through the different steps, but it does everything in one go. We thought that for JReleaser, we could do the same thing, but break down the different elements into different sections, so that if you wanted, you can invoke the full-blown release, it's called full release, or you can invoke any of the other sections independently from one another. So if we were to separate this into three columns, we got the blue, the violet, and the green one. These are like the main branches of the behavior that you want from JReleaser. And the orange one says, I want to do everything. The blue column says, I want to create a Git release. And for that, I need a few steps. The first one is generate a changelog based on the commits. Next one is create a checksum for all the input files. These will be the zip files or any other file that you want to supply for the Git release. As an option, you can sign those files using PGP. You can upload the files to third-party servers like JFrog Artifactory or an HTTP server. Other uploaders will come in the future. And finally, the release block. This is the one that creates the Git release, uploads all files, signatures, and checksums, and uploads the changelog, and that's it. So for the violet one, this is where it creates the templates and the files required for platform-specific packagers. So for Homebrew, you need to create a formula, which is just Ruby code. And this Ruby code can be created from a template. That's exactly what the prepare and package phases do. And publish is the one that grabs that thing, that final product, and publish it to the right output, to the right server. So for example, if you want to create a Docker image based on a template, so prepare and package will do that, and publish will push it to the Docker registry, particular Docker registry that you have configured. The same thing will happen for Snapcraft and the others. And the announce, well, that's just one block and simply says, oh, there you go. I simply tweet something or announce to SDK man or Zulip or email, what have you. You'll notice that there is a fourth column. JReleaser assumes that you have built the binaries before invoking JReleaser. But we supply convenience way to build cross-platform Java runtimes with JLink or native executables using GraalVM native image. You can build those using the build tools or other means, or you can let JReleaser build those for you based on the metadata that you already have created for the project. In terms of integrations, with also, oh, by the way, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them anytime. In terms of integrations, this is the set of, oh, this thing is, I have something on my screen that is, okay, we'll see if we figure it out. There are different services that we can talk to right now. You can publish a Git release to GitHub, GitLab, GitHub. Codeberg is another free service that is based on GitHub. GitHub, well, something that you have to host yourself. Or also it could be any generic Git service. So for now, if you want to release to Bitbucket or Amazon code commit and the others, you have to use generic Git. But the support for an actual Git release is not yet there for those ones. So only those services that are explicitly named, you can create a proper Git release. For uploaders, right now I mentioned that we have JFrogActiveFactory or a regular HTTP server that accepts post or put. It's up to you to define how you want to deal with the data that JReleaser will send you. For platform-specific managers, package manager, we have Homebrew, which works on OS X and Linux, Chocolatey on Windows, Docker, anywhere where Docker works. JBank has an option for you to package a script or a jar in such a way that it can be invoked through the network, and that's the kind of deployment that we support. It's really great for Java CLI applications. Scoop, I mentioned that it's like Homebrew for Windows. SDK-man, I hope that most people know what SDK-man is. It's a way for you to install Java CLIs or, well, mostly Java CLIs on your system, and you can update versions and switch versions back and forth very easily. And finally, Snapcraft, this is for Linux. And in terms of announcement, well, look at so many different options that we have access. So Twitter is the most popular one, but if you want to use Mastodon, that's fine, Slack or Mattermost or Discord, yeah, just do it, easy. Okay, how do you launch JReleaser? There are different ways. JReleaser is originally a CLI tool, but it will expect you to have the right Java version already installed, but we can do better than that. So if you are on OS X, just install it via SDK-man, and this will expect that you have Java 8 as a minimum installed on your system. Or you can use JBank if you already have installed it. If you don't, you can install it through SDK-man as well. And this will run the latest stable version of JReleaser. Or you can install it via Brew, or you can go to the download page of the JReleaser project, and you have two options. You can download the plain zip file that requires you to have a previous version of Java installed, or you can download the standalone version, which is a cross-platform Java runtime created with JLink. With this, you don't need any Java version previously installed because the zip file will contain the minimum version of Java required for it. For Linux, the instructions are pretty much the same. I should have added Homebrew here because now that is supported. And for the standalone versions, we have two different versions. The standalone version with Linux, this works for any Linux distribution that relies on glibc. And the Linux muscle, this is the typical one that you will require if you are running on Linux Alpine or any other distribution that uses muscle instead of glibc. And for Windows, almost the same options, SDK-man, JBank. Now you can also use a Scoop. We don't publish to Chocolatey yet, but that's something that we can do in the future. And again, you also have the choice to download the zip files, where the one that requires Java already installed, or the standalone version, which gives you everything already. Another way to do it is to run the jar file that is executable automatically. You can use this script called JReleaser Java, use Java 11 to launch from source. This is a very trivial script that has no magic attached. There is no tracking, nothing whatsoever. What you see is what you get. And this will be able to download a particular version of JReleaser or the latest version if you don't specify the version. And then you can invoke the jar, passing any additional commands as you would do if you had installed it with the other way. This is important to know because this is mostly the mechanism that we use to run JReleaser on CI environments. If there is no explicit support for a CI solution, then just downloading the jar and run it will be the way to go to get started. We also supply Docker images ready-made. We have two images: Slim runs on Ubuntu, so JLibC, and Alpine runs on Linux Alpine. And these are also reusable inside CI. So if you have a CI solution like GitLab, a CI that requires Docker images, then you can use it right away. There is integration for the popular Maven, for the popular build tools such as Maven, Gradle, and Apache N, or just run it on the CLI. In terms of CICD, we have guides that show you how to integrate it with all these different services. There are 14 of them. In the case of GitHub Actions, we have a explicit GitHub action that you can use. It's called release action, if I'm not mistaken. And I mentioned that for GitLab CI, you can use the Docker image that is already ready-made. And some others, the guys for these other services will show you exactly what you need to do, the minimum set of steps that you can follow in order to run JReleaser inside these solutions. The inputs, this is what you have to supply to JReleaser. It could be a binary distribution. It's just a regular zip file or a tar file that has a specific file structure. So there's a bin directory that has the launcher or the executable or something that says run the application. And it may have a lib directory where you find all the jars, and may have a README, license, you name it. There are plugins for both Maven and Gradle that can generate zip files with this particular structure. Or you may decide to package your binary as a single fat jar and executable, also known as uberjar. Well, we support this as well. You can, as I mentioned earlier, you can use cross-platform JLink Java runtimes. You can create them outside, or you can let JReleaser do it for you. Of course, we support them. Ground VM native image, also created from the outside, or let JReleaser create that for you. And native package. These are packages created using JPackage. So, for example, DMG and PKG for Mac, or MSI-XE for Windows, or RPM or Dev for Debian. And lastly, I should have added that the previous version of JReleaser, so 06, it also allows to run, to package any kind of native executable that is not built with Growl and is not built with Java. So if you want to package something built with Rust or Python or JavaScript, the JReleaser can do it for you as well. Okay, so enough of the theory. Let's get into the practice. In case that you have any questions, do let me know. Okay, so I have, let's see, SDK man list JReleaser. We have 7 versions currently published for JReleaser. The last stable version is 0.70. And I'm currently working on 0.8 snapshot, so that's what I have installed. And currently selected is 0.70, so that's good. So that means that I can invoke JReleaser-v, and I get this information. Okay, that's perfect. That's the right one. Good. Also, in this project, this is a very trivial Java application. It's a CLI that outputs a single value. It's a Maven project, and I have a JReleaser YAML file there. Okay, so let's build the application first. And this will build the tar.gc and a zip file with the right setup. So if I look into target, I get the distribution file structure is this one. and I get those two source files that I want to publish, or I would say eventually we will publish them. I also have this project listed on GitHub. It's the same sources. There are no releases, no tag, nothing whatsoever, and also have the same sources in GitLab and Codeberg. For now, we're going to look at GitHub. So this application, if I say git remote and list all the remotes, that talks to GitHub. All right. The next thing I can do is look at the POM file. The POM file is very simple. It has gap coordinates and some settings. If I want to publish this to Maven Central, it has the right information and a couple of plugins for executing, and the jar file, and app assembler is the one that creates the binary, and assembly is the one that creates the zip file and the targc, and there's nothing else. All right. So I'm going to create a Git release in this way. JReleaser release, but I'm going to tell it to auto-configure itself. This will not use the JReleaser YAML file that is right there. And the next thing I need to do is tell it right now, what is the project version that I want to release? Well, it's version 1.00. Everything else will be, anything else can be defined as part of command flags, such as the tag name and the branch and whatnot. But if I'm using the defaults, there's nothing more that I need to define. And the Git information for pushing this code will also be found from the Git repository itself. So when I do this, let's see what happens. We get this label, auto-configure is on, and loads some information. From here, it's loading the GitHub token that I need to publish to GitHub. Otherwise, that would be an error. If it's not coming from a default place, you can change that place. You can change the format. We support YAML, TOML, and JSON. And you can also supply these values as environmental variables. So it validates the configuration. The version number is fine. We get some data, then generates the changelog, calculates some checksums. There are no checksums, no input files, no signing files because there's nothing there. It doesn't upload to Artifactory because I'm not setting any files. This releases to GitHub, and it writes down the output properties of the things that happen. So I can tell you this location out JReleaser. We got these two files, output properties and tracelog. And if we look at the content of JReleaser output properties, that's the current hash. That's the Java version that I used to run JReleaser. So metadata about the project that was inferred, what is the current tag name, and when this thing was run. But also, you notice that there is this tracelog. This contains everything that JReleaser did in the book mode. So if you encounter a problem, send me this file, because in this way I can tell exactly which version and which git commit this version of JReleaser is using. It prints out the full evaluated model right there. And at the end, it's everything that it did. All right. So let's go back to GitHub. Let's do refresh. What do we find here? Now we have a tag. We have a release. Let's click on that one. And this is what we get. We get release B001 and some automated changelog, and we get no assets, nothing. All right, we can do better. We can tell autoconfig to generate a formatted changelog. So we can do that by simply saying changelog. And we're going to overwrite the existing release. If I don't do overwrite, then I will get a failure, because then I will expect the release to already exist and do nothing. I can also do, instead of overwrite, I can update the release, and I can tell it, do I want to overwrite the title, the body, or the release assets? So right now it's enough to simply say drop it and recreate it. Oops, what they didn't like? Didn't like the changelog. Did I miss something? Oh, that's weird. I thought that was enough. Oh, back to the changelog file. Okay, yes, it's not changelog, it's changelog formatted. If I read correctly, then I should do it. Okay, so now we get these two additional settings. Release override is true and release changelog formatted equals true. If I go here and do a refresh, it looks a bit better. But we can do better than this. You notice that I'm following a convention. This is a convention that you can specify. This is the one that I just chose for this project, to use some sort of prefix for each one of the commits. So we have chore or fix or feat or something else. Now I'm going to look into the model. JReleaser. There we go. So there's information about my project right there. So metadata for the name of the project that will also be used for the name of the repository or other places where this thing is useful. This description and long description will make use if you want to publish to Homebrew, some of the places. The Java version is currently used. Perfect. Now let's look into the release section. I'm releasing to GitHub. I'm going to overwrite. I'm going to sign the commits. I'm also going to create a discussion category that matches the announcements category for my project. And then I have information for the changelog. So I want to format. Every line will be formatted like this. I want to format contributors because right now, if you look at the contributors, it's just the name. I want to label commits. This only looks at local commits. I want to apply 3 labels: feature, issue, and task based on regular expressions. If it starts with feat or fix or chore, it will apply those labels. The next thing is, given those labels, I will apply categories. So this will be the title of the category, and any labels that match here in this list will be attached to that category. So we got features, issues, and tasks. And finally, I want to remove that prefix from the final render changelog. So I do this. There should be an option called replace, which by default is empty. So if I want to remove, it's just enough to say, this is the thing that I want to match, and then we replace with an empty string. I will sign artifacts. I will create a Homebrew formula for these artifacts. And these are the 2 artifacts I want to publish, a zip file and a targc. You will notice that there's this weird looking variable placeholder. These are mustache templates. And this value, distribution name, matches this name here. And project version will match the actual project version of your metadata. So in this case, it should be 100. So if you want to have rolling releases or don't have to update the paths for the binaries, every time you push a new version, just use these kind of variables. Or you can just put everything explicit. This is up to you. Okay, so now that that is done, I can now say JReleaser, display me the configuration. And it shows me the evaluated model with different colors. So now I can tell which thing is thing. So yeah, it's the project's name app. That is the version that matches semantic versioning. It's not a snapshot. I got some additional properties, validation for Java, GitHub. You notice that there is more information from GitHub that I did not define. This is everything that the model has been evaluated. So if you have any doubts on what is going to happen, then the config section will tell you. And yeah, that's it. So now here we go. I'm going to do JReleaser, release for real. And calculates checksums now because I have input files, signs the files using my secret PGP, my secret key and the public key and the passphrase, which again, I have everything committed here, all my secrets on this particular location, which again, you can change. So signs everything. There's nothing to upload to Artifactory. And then creates the release and uploads 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 assets. Let's look at the release here. That looks more different. Here's a formatted changelog. And notice that the prefixes are gone. They were replaced. Now we got the 3 categories, and this one was not matched. So there is always a category for unmatched commits. the contributors are now formatted in this way. And I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different assets, which will match all the assets that I uploaded. And this is basically it. But let's go into this repository, into Homebrew tab. Oh, that is not the way. Typo. Whoa. Again, GitHub, Almiray, Homebrew tab. This is it. And there were no changes. This is the last time I published this, but this is the formula that was created for the for this application. So if I wanted, I can just install this application using Homebrew, because it will point out to this URL, which happens to be the asset that we uploaded just a few seconds ago. But yeah, okay, it works. It's GitHub. Let's go into GitLab. I have a version of the application on GitLab. The only difference that I have with this one is the release section now mentions GitLab and does not mention a discussion category. Oh, by the way, I forgot to show that. Here we look into the Git release from GitHub, and says join release discussion. We click that one, and that moves into the discussion tab, and we see exactly that. It creates a discussion on the announcement category, which is exactly what we configure. And if you want, you just can click on that one icon, board it up, and add more content to that, discuss the release. Okay, so GitLab doesn't have that. So we take out that, we change the name, and we take out the discussion, but everything else in this file is exactly the same. So let's look into GitLab. There are no tags, no releases. Let's do the same command as before, JReleaser release. And calculates the checksums, signs everything. It starts to upload the assets. And I should finish in just a moment. Here we go. It takes a little bit longer. But we refresh here. Now I have a tag. So we click on that one. And there's a release attached to it. So we click on the release. And notice that we also have the assets. And we got the changelog, just like we did for GitHub and the contributors as well. Yay! What about Codeberg? Let's look into Codeberg. And let's look into the JReleaser file. And the only change is this. I say Codeberg instead of GitLab or GitHub. And the rest of the configuration is exactly the same. Okay, so one more time. JReleaser release. And this one is a bit faster. And we go into Codeberg and refresh. I have a tag. I have a release. We click on that one. And it looks very similar to GitHub. The same changelog. The contributors, in this case, it did not find my email account. I guess I have a different account in this service. And there are all the assets. Everything works exactly the same. And because we set up Homebrew, that means that if I go here, Homebrew tab, and now I don't make a typo here, I have the formula, which is exactly identical as I pushed it before. So there are no changes. And here, I can say also, Homebrew tab, the repository is created automatically for you. If it's not there, well, that's strange. It did not do it. There's only app. Yeah, there's no Homebrew here. Huh, I can change that. JReleaser YAML active is always. That's strange. Should have created that. Maybe I just stumbled upon a bug. I have to figure out what's going on. Maybe Codeberg is broken, but GitHub should have worked correctly. Anyway, I'll figure out why this didn't work, and I'll come back to it. So this is the basic thing about JReleaser. The engine It's just a matter of creating templates, files based on templates, and the model for your project. And based on that, then you can do a lot of things. This tool works for all varieties of projects. It's not just one like this that creates a CLI. But for example, in the Moditech project, let's go into Moditech. Yeah, we just released a version of Moditech, which is a bunch of jars and a Maven plugin. And the only thing that we use JReleaser for here is to create a Git release with no binaries, nothing whatsoever. It's just that we have this nice changelog. The publication to Maven Central happens automatically with Maven. That's nothing that is related to JReleaser. Here's another project, Casey Cuddle, or Cute Cuddle. Right, this is a Quarkus CLI that builds native executables with Graal. So there will be 3 different binaries for Linux, Windows, and OS X. And we push those binaries in the release. Right now, there's no final release. There's something called a rolling release, an early access release, which will do that if this will create a delta of the latest release, but also will publish the different assets. This particular project uses the Maven plugin to configure JReleaser, and that we can find it at the bottom of the POM file. Here we go. So that's the block for the JReleaser plugin. Instead of being a distribution of type Java binary, which is the default, and we say it's a native image. And when we say that, that enables the use of different platform package managers. We have a file, 3 different inputs, a targc, a zip file, and a zip file, but we also rename the artifacts. Because the project version right now is, I think is 1.0.0 snapshot. But if we look at the publication, yeah, we go back to the releases and the assets. We actually changed the name to early access. If you look at the POM file, it's 1.0.0 snapshot, but the release is different. How we make that happen? JReleaser can apply transformation to the path. So if you want to rename a file into something else, and this is the one that is going to be signed and checksum and everything else. So as you can see, it's viable, it's flexible, it works for all kind of projects. The main site, well, the repository for JReleaser is right here, and a few other things. So JReleaser publishes itself as JBank, so that you can see that. It also publishes Docker images, so you can consume JReleaser using Docker. Or we also publish to the Snapcraft, Snapstore, and Scoop, and we have homebrew actually homebrew formulas for this. And here is a repository for the GitHub action in case that you want to use it. And the website for the project is jreleaser.org, which if you go into the documentation right here, it goes to pretty much the same things that I mentioned before. So what it is and how it works. Somewhere there is the workflow, which we saw earlier with exact explanation of each one of the steps and the types of distributions that you can use. So I was just missing the standard binary in the slides and some common concepts. And finally, just click on configuration, and this is everything that you can configure in JReleaser. Say, for example, I want to configure Twitter, just click here. And if you want to use YAML, then use that. Right? You don't like YAML, that's fine. Use TOML or JSON or the Maven DSL or the Gradle DSL. Right? Every bit of the configuration is written in the 5 different formats. So it's very easy to copy and paste from one another. There are some ready-made examples right here. So for example, if you want to know how JReleaser publishes itself, because of course, JReleaser uses JReleaser to create its own releases. Well, here's an explanation of the whole build file. And, or if you want to create a very trivial release, this is the minimum information that you have to put in for This is just basic changelog, no input files, no signing, no checksum, but you get a git release like that. Or create cross-platform JLink images. Now, the advantage of JLink is that you can invoke JLink for the different targets inside the same node. So if I am on OS X, I can build for OS X and Linux. That is not the same case for Ground native image. You have to run the specific OS. So if you want to create a native image for OS X, you have to run on OS X. There's no other way. That's the reason why CICD has set up a GitHub action in different nodes to build all the different binaries and then combine those and then do the release with just JReleaser. Okay, so I think that's what I have for now for the demo and a few more slides. So what's coming in the future for the tool? We may be thinking of supporting additional Git releasers specifically, such as Bitbucket or Azure, because they also have a Git release feature, which will make sense to have a Git release page and a changelog and assets and everything else as you do with the other services. We may also support additional upload services. I already mentioned JFrog Artifactory and HTTP, but what if you wanted to upload to AWS S3 bucket or Azure Cloud or Oracle Cloud or anything else, any other kind of uploader? Sure, why not? And right now you can publish native installers that have been created with JPackage, but just like we did with JLink and Growl, we could look into the future of having JReleaser create those installers via JPackage. So if there is already metadata in your project that can be reused to create safe native installers, then we can do so. So it will give you, again, another option, whether you want to create the packages from the outside, or would you like JReleaser to do that work for you? I have some resources for you. So I already mentioned the website, JReleaser.org. That is where you find the documentation and everything about the project and how you can use it. The Git repository for the main project is right there. We also have an open collective. We accept sponsorships and donations for JReleaser. And of course, we have a Twitter account for JReleaser where we tweet about news and stuff and whatnot. So everything that we have seen today so far is open source. If you have not contributed to open source before, it's very easy. You find a problem with what you saw today or any other dependency or any other project that is open source that you consume in your daily work, file a ticket. That's it. There's nothing more that you need to do. Just create a ticket. You don't have to supply source code if you don't want to. You don't have to supply a test case, but just engage in a conversation when something is missing or something can be improved. And that is plenty of help for us open source developers. Maybe in time, you would like to contribute source. Maybe in time, you even become a contributor, even a committer. Well, we don't know. That's the whole point of open source. You just simply supply as much as you are willing to do so. And I think that's it. That's everything that I have for now. And of course, I could keep speaking for hours about this tool because it's one of my passions. But I only have to say that since we started making releases with JReleaser, I made sure that most of my projects, if not all, use JReleaser, and that has dramatically simplified how I do releases. Let me show you how simple this thing is. I go into JReleaser, click on Actions. There is this release workflow for which the only thing that I need to do is say which version I want to release. And this will kickstart a GitHub workflow that looks like this. It changes the version number given the input. So now I set the version. I'm using Gradle to build. So this pushes everything, then publishes to Sonatype. So this builds, this publishes to Sonatype. Then I use the latest version of JReleaser using the early access version, do assemble for the JLink images, and then do the actual release. And once this is done, I'm going to push an update into the documentation site so that I can change, tell the documentation site which is the latest version. And that's it. JReleaser here took charge of doing everything else for me. And I can pass in the different secrets in this way, or if I had a Git configuration or those JReleaser toml files that I showed earlier, then instead of doing it explicitly, it will just simply be one entry saying where is the configuration where it has all the secrets. And this is what I do for pretty much every other project that I'm currently maintaining. Once I have something like this, just go back into the actions, select the workflow, and push it. This is the mythical release button, and this thing does everything for me.
Thank you, Andreas. There's been no questions so far. I did have a few, but you seem to have answered them with every next slide that I seem to have some. When you mentioned earlier about an RPM or a Debian package, because that's something I've been interested in a personal project. Does JReleaser help you build that, or is that through a third-party tool? If you want to build an RPM of your software, or is that?
Not yet. This is one of the features that we're looking for in the future. So right now, you can create a Debian and RPM package using JPackage.
Okay.
Starting from JDK 14 as a preview or JDK 16 as a final tool. And I use the Gradle JLink. Is the JLink plugin or the runtime plugin, depending if it's a modular or non-modular application, that can also create JPackage packages for you.
Okay.
But again, you will have to configure that in your build tool. Okay. I do it with the build tool because the application that I want to publish is JavaFX, and JavaFX has platform-specific jars. So I have to run it in different nodes anyway. So for this specific case, it's better right now to build it with the build tool instead of if JReleaser had a specific support for it.
Okay.
That's something that is coming in the future, yeah.
So taking that a step further, so if you've built your RPM or Debian, if you want to publish, is there anything about publishing? Where to publish those? Is that something that you've thought of, or is that something? Because I know there's historically it's been quite a challenge to try and get an RPM available in the public repos or a Debian piece of software in the public.
Right. Yes. So for now, what we do without support for any additional uploaders, what will happen is that the RPM and Debian, anything else will be published to the Git repository as part of the assets. So this is the application that I have, the JavaFX called Iconlink. And on the release access, the early access for this version, I have a bunch of assets. And here are the RPMs.
Okay. And
CFAs and everything, right? So these were created using Gradle build and telling JReleaser where are the locations of the files so that I can sign and check on them. And there's nothing more than that.
Okay.
In the future, there could be a custom uploader that detects I have an RPM. Do I have the option to publish to a well-known RPM server with credentials and authentication and everything else?
Okay, that's great. We have had a question from Craig. To start digging into code, what would you recommend as an entry point? If somebody wants to look into the code base.
On the code base for JReleaser?
I believe so, yes.
I guess
maybe this is for a contribution, maybe.
Well, I guess it depends on what you're trying to do. If I showed you here, the apps contains the CLI. We use Pico CLI for that. So if you want to contribute something to the CLI, this is the place to go. Or in core, this is the model. This is the one that abstracts the metadata that is mapped from YAML, JSON, and everything else. The engine is the actual execution. This is what selects the distributions or announcers or assemblers, the tools, everything else. We have the plugins for Ant, Maven, and Gradle, and 2 additional plugins that allow you to download JDKs very easily and cache them. This is what we do for, it's a helpful thing, but it's not a required thing for generating the cross-platform Java runtimes, and a bunch of SDKs. So this is a Git SDKs based on JGit, with just the minimum base thing that we require for JReleaser, and a minimum set of operations if you want to talk to GitLab. We don't use any GitLab external dependency. We just use regular JSON and Feign for this, because you just need a subset of the API. We don't need everything. For now, in GitHub, we do use Hook4j, and which brings everything. It's just one additional dependency. We will eventually migrate this to use Feign and Jackson. So everything else, every other integration, you can find it here. So if there is something that is not working with a Slack, this will be the place to look for it. And speaking of contributions, there is one thing that we just added very, very recently. And we added the option for internationalization of the CLI. So we got messages for English and messages for German. So if there were any other translations, we are more than happy to welcome them, especially now that it's Hacktoberfest. And there will be other resources for their model and the SDKs that is still forthcoming. We are still working on that one, but eventually the tool will be able to should print out information in a particular native language.
Okay, that's great. There's been no further questions. Give everybody a minute in case anybody's typing away. I suppose, touching on what you said earlier about contributing, is there some good first issues that if anybody is interested in, they could take a look at?
Let's see. So right now we have, most of the issues are a little bit big. So for example, full support for Azure or AWS. This requires a lot of changes. We don't have small ones right now that I can think of. Or maybe this one. This is something that is giving me a bit of trouble because I don't have any Windows machine that I have access to right now. And this particular user, he's from Belgium and has been using JReleaser in a lot of projects. He eventually found out that the way that we create the signatures, they work okay as long as he does not use this particular tool called GPG for Win. That instead of having a header of begin PGP message, you expect something like begin PGP signature. As far as I understand, he makes a link to other tools that can solve this, but using C#, not Java. The way that should work is configure bouncy castle in a different way. So instead of generating this header, it generates this other header, and that we can verify. So if you know a bit about bouncy castle, this could be a good way to enter. If you do not know bouncy castle, then probably it's not a good way to get into that one. Here's another one that I just created recently. If we look at the releases, we finally list the contributor names, and we look for the author and the committer in the commit section. But this is information that can be added to the commit body. So what we need to do is parse the commit body, find all entries that look like this, and also signal that to the change.generator so they can query those names. This is a fairly sized way to get started also. Other than that, right now, these other issues might be a bit bigger.
Okay, thank you. I think Craig's just highlighted what I've just asked about the good first issues. Okay, if there's no other questions, I'll wrap up. Thank you very much, Andreas, for joining the Manchester Java community again today. The video of today's talk should be up on our YouTube channel in the next few days. Keep an eye on our Twitter account for the link. And thank you everyone for attending.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for being here, and keep enjoying the Manchester Java community.